Good morning, and welcome to our first press conference of this film festival. I'm Dennis Lim, the festival's director of programming. I'm very pleased to have quite a few special guests with us, so I'm just going to call them all out on stage. We have the screenwriter and director of The Tragedy of Macbeth, Joel Coen. The producer of the film, who also plays Lady Macbeth, Frances McDormand. Lord Macbeth himself, Denzel Washington. Bertie Carvel, who plays Banquo. Moses Ingram, who plays Lady Macduff. And Harry Melling, who plays Malcolm. Thank you. Thank you so much to all of you for being here this morning. I will start, it's a little echoey. I'll start with a few questions and then we'll take them from you. Maybe a question first for the director and producer of the film. Fran, I know that you did Macbeth on stage a few years ago at Berkeley Rep, also playing Lady Macbeth. Did the conversations about making a film Macbeth start for you and Joel around that time, or did it predate that production?
I think I had asked Joel a couple times if he was interested in doing it on stage, and he said absolutely not. He had no interest in doing theater, though I tried probably over about a 15-year period and then gave up. Was very fortunate to do it at Berkeley with Dan Sullivan, who knows his way around Shakespeare and the theater. And then I think, though, that did inspire Joel to think about it as a screen adaptation.
Joel?
Yeah, it's interesting because Dan very generously let me sit in on some of the rehearsals that they were doing when they were putting it up on stage at Berkeley Rep, which was really great for me, actually. And, I really appreciate it and thank him for that. But as Fran was saying, my feeling was always that I'm not a stage director. I really wouldn't know what to do, honestly. But I did say to her at a certain point, if you want to think about it as a movie, or if you let me think about it as a movie, I might get somewhere with it, and maybe we could do something interesting.
What does that mean for you, to think about Shakespeare as a movie?
Well, I just, it means that unlike doing something on the stage where there's one sort of visual metaphor for the whole thing, which is essentially the sort of primary stage set in terms of what you're looking at, it's just not the way my brain works, you know? I mean, movies are very much about where you're looking, from where you're looking, and how long you're looking at a very particular thing from a particular angle. And that's really that's what distinguishes it from theater in many ways. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. It's a little, but just going to how you think about something in terms of adapting it dramatically for somebody to look at.
So, since we have so many of the amazing cast with us, I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about, I think something that's always very important for Shakespeare, whether on stage or on screen, is just putting your company together. And starting, of course, with Denzel Washington and one of his great roles here. Very early on, did you think of Denzel in this role? And how did you fill out the rest of the cast?
Yeah. and what was great was it was a pretty short conversation. You said, yeah, you were like, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, you don't make lists for the best, for a generation's Macbeth. One is born and then they play it, from my point of view.
So Denzel, you just said yes right away?
Yes, I did. Okay. This is a fascinating journey for me. I went to school 1,000 feet from here and played Othello at 20, didn't know what I was doing. So just, it was a long 1,000 feet, you know, but when you're working with two, not just two, but I almost used the word old, but more states, whatever the word is,
Elders.
masters.
Elders.
And then witnessing these young masters chasing us down like. But the cool thing, to go back to what you were saying, was that we were a company. The way Joel and Fran led us, we sat around the table. People played different roles. I should be talking to you, right? People played different roles in the readings. We became, I think, a company. My daughter had maybe one line in the film, and a wonderful actress. And the first day, whatever day it was of reading, Joe was like, "Well, no, you're going to read The King," and this, and he threw everybody under the bus, and you had to sink or swim, and you know, that's what we live for. So I'm honored and fortunate that they said yes to me.
What was it like for you to return to Shakespeare on screen? I mean, throughout your career, you've done Shakespeare several times, some major productions, Richard III and Julius Caesar, of course. But you know, to come back to doing this role on screen, can you talk about what that was like for you?
That's how it was. You know, it's the ultimate challenge. It's the ultimate reward. And, you know, it's where I started and where I want to finish.
It's a very, I think, very diverse group of actors in many ways, not least in terms of their backgrounds. I mean, you have American actors, British actors. You have people, you know, who have a lot of theater experience, some people with less. Can you talk about just harmonizing all of that? Like, you know, was that a process of rehearsing, or?
I'm sorry, was that?
Just the process of rehearsal?
Oh, right. It's really true. And there was, you know, we had Brendan, who is Irish, and Harry and Bertie, and Alex Hassel, who played Ross, who were,
And Catherine Hunter.
and Catherine, right? All coming from England. And then pretty much the rest of the cast, all American. So you had this, you know, it was very interesting because we were all working with Kate Wilson, who's at Juilliard here. And one of the earliest discussions with Kate was, you know, accents, and I think actually, if I remember right, I think didn't we, like in an early rehearsal, we sort of experimented with taking the accents down to a sort of more
It wasn't an
commonplace,
experiment.
right?
You said to Kate, ask them to do it all in American tomorrow. And to a one,
Yeah.
they all did it perfectly. Do you remember that? And then the next day, Joel said, no, go back. Right? They're like,
Correct.
oh, that was fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I just thought I liked the mix of it, and I also thought that it wasn't going to be a barrier to essentially accepting the world that we were making, you know, and that's kind of how we landed there. But you're right. I mean, beyond that, it's the cast is diverse in other ways, obviously, and I think that proceeded from a couple of places. One was that the imperative for me at the beginning was who's playing Macbeth here, you know, and that was an easy and short, thanks to Denzel. And everything else just sort of proceeded from there. So that's the way.
And you got the Yale and the Juilliard Mafia,
Yeah, we
with
got
all
the
the
Yale and
youngsters, right?
Juilliard
There's a
Mafia.
bunch of Yaleys and a bunch of.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I mean the diversity in the dialects and the background of theater and film and training was kind of exciting in that room, and it was by invitation only too for at least 3 of the weeks. Was anybody that wanted to be in that room made themselves available to be in that room, and I don't think many people decided not to. Almost everybody showed up. It was great.
I'd love to hear the other actors maybe say a bit about that. Bertie, Moses, Harry.
It's extremely rare to rehearse in this medium, right? And to rehearse in a meaningful way. So I think that was an enormous privilege. And one of the things I love about the film, I want to say, pay a huge compliment in every direction, is that I think it pays homage to both the cinematic and the theatrical traditions that this play has sat in, and but it finds a kind of vocabulary that is both. I feel like I'm talking about dialect. You want the play to be heard through whatever you're doing, right? You don't want to sort of put a layer in the way. And I think that's what's so amazing. I remember Joel in rehearsal talking about the aesthetic, and I was sort of drilling him, trying to figure out what the thing was, and he used the word sculptural, and very few other words, which is his mode, right? You know, it's quite hard to get him to commit to saying what it was, and that was very useful. But what was clear was that it was about taking things away and getting out of the way of the play. And when I watch the film, that's very much the impression I have. It's very, it allows the way everybody handles the language. I mean, everybody comes from their own different place and whatever, but you hear the play and you see what's going on in these people's souls, and I think that's extremely hard to accomplish. And I'm sure that having time in a room together to sort of marinate in the world of the play and is key in that. It was a real privilege, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just what Bertie said, really. The fact that we had, was it 3 weeks or 4 weeks just together, setting the language of how it's going to work, and everyone really pulling toward the same vision, which is sometimes rare in films because everyone's sort of coming at it from a different angle. But to have those 3 weeks where we sort of set out the mission of what we want to achieve was just, I think, vital, and why it's such a striking piece.
I think one of the biggest blessings for me in this process was just being in the room and watching. I think people wait their whole lives to be in rooms like this one and to be in rehearsal, and it's like finding out everybody poops, you know? You know, like watching them like be in rehearsal.
I'll be back.
You know, like watching them be in rehearsal and figuring it out right in front of me, and me very much just not wanting to fuck it up, you know? But them just so free and so graceful in it. It just was a privilege. Like watching the movie back, like I came on set a lot of days when I wasn't working just to watch like the archway scene. I was like, oh, I was right there outside the arch, like watching that happen. And I feel so blessed that like 50 years from now, when like a class of students is like watching this movie, I get to be like, you know, I was in the room. It's a beautiful thing.
Denzel and Fran, you referred to yourselves as elders a bit ago. I think that's one change from what we usually see in Macbeth productions and films. You know, I think when Polanski made his in the 70s, he co-wrote that with Kenneth Tynan, and Tynan actually said in a piece that he didn't want the actors were in their 20s, and he thought that was because he didn't want people who were, quote, too old to be ambitious. So, and I think, you know, this, I think this is an interesting change that alters the dynamics of the story. I wonder if you or the actress want to speak to that.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was the question?
Age, about being an older couple. Well, you know, part of what Joel and I talked about really early, because the first thing I ever did, the first thing that got me hooked on wanting to be an actor for the rest of my life was the sleepwalking scene from the tragedy. And I did it when I was 14, and then so I've pretty much been practicing and rehearsing for it for 50 years. So I feel like it was a kind of had a fated inevitability to it, and that it ended up being sculpted in this way seems absolutely perfect. You know, at some point we have to talk about the ceremony that we had for our 4 elders that used this film as their punctuation point on their film careers. Remember when we had them kneel before us and we took the...
Yes, that's right. That's correct.
We had 4 colleagues.
Oh, that's right. Like Carl and
Yeah, and they decided to make this film their last film, and so we had a ceremony. We made these really beautiful medals on a beautiful ribbon, and we had the sword out, and they knelt. We helped them get up, knelt. We made them knights and ladies. That was really, really big. But symbolically, there is something perfectly punctuate. This is a perfect punctuation point in so many ways for me. I know. So being an older couple, take it for a second, because you know what? When I hear our company talk, it's like this is the other thing about being an elder. I just get choked up over and over again. I can't believe we did this. It's fabulous. So talk for a second. Like really hard.
I think these plays get done again and again because they can take the weight of reinterpretation. So, of course, every actor brings themselves to every part they play, and but the great roles they have that depth of field, I think. So there something new is illuminated. I don't want to see the same version of, there's no such thing as a definitive version of these great plays, I don't think. And so, of course, yeah, I mean, I think it's revealing to put any given lens on the play, and yeah.
It's a built-in sense of urgency. This is it. Mm-hmm. This is the last go-round, and they've been stepped over by the king, and they want it, and we understand.
And we understand. You might think, oh, maybe they don't understand, but guess what? We understand, because when we first talked on the phone, Denzel and it's our own private conversation, but what we both understood about each other, that there's always been a fight. We fought it as gracefully as possible, but the fight's never going to be over. So, we brought that to it. We still knew how to fight. Maybe we were limping a little bit. Maybe it took us a little bit longer to get, but the fight was still there.
Still knew how to win.
We still knew how to win.
Okay, I'm just going to ask one more before we open it up. Question for Joel. Obviously, I think a big part of the power of the film, it's the performances, it's the text, which is, you're very faithful to, but it's also the staging and the look of the film. And there's a lot of choices that I think account for this very strong atmosphere of the film. I wonder if you could maybe talk about some of them. Black and white, Academy ratio, and just the staging. I mean, it's Bertie was saying you find a kind of middle ground between the cinematic and the theatrical, and I think that comes across in how it's staged as well. It's not, I think a lot of people would do a film Shakespeare and try to naturalize it by finding, certain landscapes or whatever, and you have these.
Right. Well, I sort of started from the place of, there are 2 ways of approaching this, which are, as you just said, that sort of naturalistic way. You rent a castle somewhere and you go out in Scotland and ride around on horses but for me, and I think this proceeded a little bit from the first impulse that Fran asking me to do it on stage in a way is I didn't want to abandon the notion of the play. It was taking a play and making a movie of it that was interesting to me, not trying to make a play into a movie. I didn't want to hide the play. And I think a lot of what Bertie said earlier on is really kind of, I hadn't actually, believe it or not, thought about it this way until you just said it, but a lot of the motivating sort of impulse in terms of design was taking things away. It isn't just about, the design was about stripping it down in a strange kind of a way. And in that respect, I had, probably the longest gestation process for any design that we've ever, because everything I've done in the past has been at least brushing up on naturalism, brushing it, no matter how amped it may have been. But but this seemed a totally different exercise, and I had the privilege and the good fortune to be working with Bruno Delbonnel and Stefan Deschamps, both of them, on this long process of figuring out what it was going to look like. The idea of shooting it in black and white and the aspect ratio were actually pretty much there from the beginning. But the thing about shooting it in black and white, which I've always loved, and I love black and white, I love it in general, not just in terms of this movie, is that black and white is a way of instantly abstracting an image in a way that everybody understands. You're abstracting it by taking the color away, but it's not like people read it as being abstracting quotation marks. And that kind of abstraction seemed particularly suited to the enterprise of sort of preserving this as a play and a theatrical experience.
Okay, we're going to take questions. If you could raise your hand, I'll call on you. No past microphones, so I'm going to ask you to please project, and if you could be concise, that would be helpful.
Hello, everybody. Congratulations. Joel, I wondered if, when you were doing this in black and white Shakespeare, if you saw this linking perhaps to the 20th century, like Brooke, Lear, Olivier, Hamlet, Orson Welles, Shakespeare, as kind of the linked process.
Yeah.
Sorry, I should just repeat that, right? A question about shooting in black and white and whether there's a connection with Wells, Brooks, Olivier, I think you mentioned. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, there are, there's Wells also did a film of this play, did Chimes at Midnight, which is a very beautiful movie. I think his adaptation of this play is a very strange movie, but it's interesting to look at. So there was that a little bit, but to be honest, it was, from a visual point of view and from what seemed like it would be interesting in connection with this play, we were looking more at like Dreyer than we were at, Wells, because of the way he sort of strips everything down. I mean, again, going back to that same thing that Bertie was talking about.
The lighting is also kind of like German expressionist
Yeah.
or film noir.
Yeah, Dreyer was Danish, but also German expressionism and Murnau,
Right.
Sunrise, how you do big outdoor spaces on sound stages, which is this beautiful, beautiful thing he could do, which nobody else has ever come close to. That was a big inspiration, and these sort of mind-boggling things that are so simple and so beautiful and so theatrical, and seem so in keeping with, again, with the kind of enterprise of keeping it a play.
Okay, yes, right here.
Hi, first of all, congratulations on the film. For Francis, so you mentioned that you have played Lady Macbeth so many times in your life. I was wondering if there's something new you find it for each time since such a complex character.
Question is for Francis about having played Lady Macbeth before and finding something new every time you approach this character.
In fact, I haven't played it before. I had only played it once at Berkeley Rep, and I think I was like 56, 58. I'm not sure. I don't remember. But and then at 14, the first time. I thought about it. I mean, I didn't really play it then. I just memorized the lines. I'm not kidding myself. But but I feel like there's been a process towards the character for 50 years, and I'm really, really glad that the interpretation that I was able to give the role has been captured on film this way, because I feel really gratified that we were able to bring the idea, not only that this was their last chance at ambition, but that also to maybe illuminate something about the female condition and the female power structure of what I think Macbeth was using in that using from that period, and especially in this couple. And I feel like we really, maybe, like I kept saying to Joel, nobody, in 400 years, everybody's done almost anything. It's not like we're inventing anything new, but I think the way that our cellular structure mixed made it a little different, and we certainly had that in mind when we were interpreting the character, and for me, that's really gratifying.
I'm going to try to call on somebody in the back. Yeah. Yes.
For Joel, what was your greatest challenge in adapting Macbeth into a screenplay?
Question for Joel: what was the greatest challenge in adapting the text into a screenplay?
Adapting it into a screenplay. I'm trying. There were certain things that I saw in other movie adaptations of Shakespeare that I was trying not to do, and trying to figure out how not to do them. For instance, it's common in movie adaptations of Shakespeare that when there's a soliloquy, you don't actually see the actor speaking the soliloquy. You hear it in voiceover, and while he's, I don't know, thinking about his lunch or something. You never know what the connection between what the actor is saying is recorded a voiceover, and now he's wandering around or mooning around the set. It never really worked for me. So I thought, how do you do that and sort of preserve the language and the speeches and the soliloquies, but have them speak, but not have it be, but still have it be in a at least quasi-realistic context, as opposed to, going to the edge of the stage and or whatever the device might be. So that was that was part of it. And there are soliloquies, there are parts of what Macbeth says in the play are soliloquies that we incorporated into scenes, so that they're actually spoken. It was that kind of a thing. I guess that's kind of getting close to what you're asking. There were problems, or issues or challenges like that.
One of the things that I thought was interesting, Joel, you like scenes that happen on stage have a beginning, middle, and end, and they follow dramaturgically, whereas Joel intercut back and forth between scenes, because in a film that just makes it more dynamic. That was, I don't think that was a challenge, but I think that was something that for me was really exciting about his adaptation.
Well, that's in particular, that's interesting, because Macbeth is a play that at the end of the play, Shakespeare at the time in the play is doing something which is essentially parallel editing in film. He's going from this scene to that scene, back to this scene to that scene to this, that are all supposed to be happening essentially in the same time, right? And he's doing it theatrically, which is I found really interesting. When we made the movie and in the adaptation, we kind of exaggerated that. Because you can in a movie. So that was another example of how the play got adapted into a movie, and also how brilliant Shakespeare was as a dramatist to anticipate that kind of storytelling.
Oh, I think he'd be pleased, don't you?
Yes. Yep.
My question is for Joel. So this is your second movie that you're releasing on a streaming service.
Well, okay, yeah.
Just quickly summarize. The question is about working. Second time you're working with a streaming service. The film will be released theatrically and also on Apple TV. And I guess just your feelings about this development in how we watch movies.
You know, as a filmmaker, you want an audience to see your movies on the best, most sophisticated, and biggest platform possible. That's just, you know, that's why you spend all this time. We're just talking to Denzel about the movie that he's finishing right now, you know, tweaking every little detail and the sound mix and the color and the, you know, whatever it happens to be. However, you know, I mean, one of the nightmares, I think, any film director is when someone says, "I saw your movie on an airplane," you know. But here's the thing about streaming services from a personal point of view. When I first got into the movie business, which was, you know, almost 40 years ago, 8 years ago, the reason I was able to make movies with Ethan, the reason we were able to have a career is because the studios at that point had an ancillary market that was a backstop for more risky films, which were VHS, cassette, or, you know, all of these home video markets, which is essentially television, right? So the fact that those markets are sort of responsible for my career make it, you know, I'm not going to bust on them now because they've become very successful, you know, and are sort of overtaking the market. I mean, it's the reason I'm here and able to do this stuff. So I have mixed feelings about it, obviously, which is the first thing. You want people to see it on a big screen. But the other part of it is that's been part of the history of our movies since the very beginning. That's the best answer I can give you to that.
I think we have to wrap up in 5 minutes, so let's try to squeeze in 2 quick questions. Yeah, right here.
Congratulations on the film. This is for everyone. Was there a particular passage that really helped you unlock what you wanted to do with this enterprise?
Could you hear?
Barely. Let me know if I'm repeating correctly. You were asking everybody if there was a particular passage in the text that helped you unlock something in the process.
Can I hear the question one more time? Sorry.
Was there a particular passage in the screenplay, I suppose, that helped you unlock something in your process? I think is the best I can do.
Shakespeare now, right?
So, yeah.
Is that Willie on the phone?
Yeah, Will's calling. Sorry. I'll call you later, Al. Sorry.
I love that phone.
Yeah, so ask us that again.
Whether or not there was a particular passage in the play that helped us unlock what we wanted to do. I think for me, I pitched Joel the idea that, you know what, I was about to talk about my own performance, which is always a bad idea. So I'm going to stop right now. I mean, look, I think a part like the one I play can be played in so many different ways, and for me, the key was about a sense of foreboding that maybe Banquo sees very early on, almost in the instant that Macbeth receives the news from the witches, the prophecy. He knows his friend well enough to worry about where that might go. And that was a hook for me. And so the line is something like, that trusted home might yet enkindle you unto the crown besides the Thane of Cawdor. But 'tis strange, and oftentimes to win us to our harms, the instruments of darkness tell us truths, win us with honest trifles to betray us in deepest consequence. Which is just a great line, and it's so true, isn't it? And it's so the ambivalence of that warning, it's, you know, for me, it's, I wanted it to be a warning, but you can warn someone of something you don't know. Like it's like giving advice to someone, isn't it? You have to be careful with advice because you don't really know what the future holds. That was the key for me.
And the eyebrows.
And the eyebrows, which are supratextual, I would say. I struggle to find the eyebrows are very important.
Well, I can't remember speeches like Bertie's done, so I can't quote anything. But I just remember thinking the most important thing about Malcolm is just how woefully unprepared he is for what happens to his dad. And that was kind of, I think, the crux for Malcolm. And then from that, he is spurred on to having to grow up very, very, very quickly. So that was the thing that I held on to, really.
I think oftentimes, at least growing up, Shakespeare's words seemed like something very hard to understand, not very much for me. And I think what I appreciate about what happens here in this film is that the language doesn't feel unattainable in that way. I think a lot of times it just gets put in a category all by itself, Shakespeare, this massive thing. But in reality, I think, which kind of sounds pretentious, is Shakespeare is really universal and it's for everybody, and it does lend itself to beauty and magic, and I think it's been captured really beautifully.
Joel
said no, or Fran too said no stick up the butt acting. Remember that? We didn't want no couches with buttons.
No upholstered sofas. Yeah, one of the things that I found in working on the role, a dramaturg once said to me, and I don't know if this is true. You guys might that the meter and the words are inviolate, but the punctuation you can mess with. So in the text that I originally memorized or worked with when we were rehearsing the play, Macbeth says to Lady Macbeth, "What if we fail?" And her response is, "We fail?" ? And the dramaturg suggested to me, try taking the question mark away. And when I put an exclamation point on it, then it became my Lady Macbeth. What if we fail? We fail. But screw your courage to the sticking place and we'll not fail. Because for us, it's not a question of whether we're going to fail. It's a question of whether we're going to attempt to fail, which is all, from my point of view.
Let's go kill him now.
Let's go get him. He's in Erin. We can't get to him. The king's in Erin.
Okay, I've been told we can take one more. So let's see. Yeah, right there. Yep.
Yeah, quick question. First of all, I'm in awe of this movie. It's far and away the greatest film, Macbeth. That's one side. Joel, it's a question for you about Ross. And you've created this sort of narrator messenger figure as a kind of counterpose to the witches, perhaps, in the film. And you see him at the end with Cleance. I just wanted some comment on that.
Well, there's a tradition in productions of Macbeth that use Ross in different ways, and also in movie adaptations. So, for instance, in the Polanski version that Dennis pointed out was written by Ken Tynan, and I have a feeling this is something Tynan brought to it. You know, he made Ross the third murderer, which that is not something that there's a production history of that. But he kind of expanded that a little bit, and I thought that was really interesting, and wondered how it could be expanded even further. I don't know in what ways it has been in the past, but it was an interesting way to think about that character, and that's what kind of led to that ending and the sort of ambiguous, sort of passage with Fleance when he finds him in the field. You know, I think obviously I've seen lots of productions of Macbeth. There are only so many productions of Macbeth on screen. That's one of the more interesting ones. I attribute a lot of it to Tynan, actually.
I love about it that I've spoken about how I think Banquo maybe sees the writing on the wall earlier than others, but I love that scene where Lady Macbeth faints, and immediately afterwards Malcolm and Donald Bain decide to flee, and you can tell that from that point onwards nearly everybody's seeing the writing on the wall. And the reason it's apposite to the Ross thing is that I think what makes the play so political is that there will always be murderous tyrants, opportunist, ambitious people led down the primrose path, but it's what everybody else does around them that makes it really dangerous. And a figure like Ross, who in Alex's performance is, you know, at times seems archly evil, but at other times just seems like somebody who is existing in a tyrannous state, trying to live on his wits and seeing which way the wind is blowing, feels very present and very kind of relevant. And it's the reason that these plays get done again and again and don't lose their sting, because you don't have to look very far to see that kind of stuff in the corridors of power anywhere in the world today. So I think it's a really smart gesture.
Great. I think we do have to wrap it up now, but I want to thank all of you for being here. We're thrilled to open the festival with this film. Thank you very much.